Hi, everybody. Trying to pull myself together after that. It was so beautiful. I want to first welcome our moderator tonight. Roxane Gay is one of our most important public intellectuals today and one of our most brilliant writers. She's the author of 5 books, including the bestsellers Bad Feminist and Hunger. And she's written millions of essays and op-ed pieces and advice columns and the World of Wakanda comic books for Marvel. She's currently at work on film and television projects while contributing opinion writer for New York Times, publishing an essay question about television and culture, and writing a book of writing advice and writing a young adult novel, all at the same time. That is Roxane Gay. She's incredible. So please join me in welcoming Roxane Gay and the amazing, brilliant director of The Farewell, Lulu Wang.
Hello. Hi, Lulu. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How does it feel to watch the finished product of a movie you've worked on for so long?
Terrible. I don't like to do it. I haven't done it actually in a while. I've done it maybe a total of 4 times in this whole year.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of restraint. How do you are you very critical of yourself? Do you look back and see mistakes or things you would do differently?
Yes, definitely. I pick everything apart. A big part of the process for me were the subtitles. And so that in particular, like, it was like this ongoing joke that even by the end, I'd be like, the dash, doesn't have the space. I'm just like a perfectionist in that way. And I don't watch the movie usually. I usually just look at all the places that could be a mistake.
And why were the subtitles so important to you?
The subtitles were important because I knew that's how, it's language. It's how an American audience is going to experience the film. And so I really, went over, like, the way things were translated over and over again and, choosing, because I speak both languages. And I know that, like, it's not always about the literal meaning. But it also has to be short enough that it actually lands, especially with comedy. That's if there's too many subtitles, it's not going to be funny if you over-explain it. And so it was like always like picking the battle of, like, is it more about the meaning? Is it more about the tone of the comedy?
And do you have an audience in mind when you write a script and direct a film?
Not really. Not really. I think that I have maybe my friends in mind, my family, like that's kind of my audience in a way. And because my community is so mixed, that there are Chinese Americans, there are Chinese, like my family in China, and then I have American friends who don't know Chinese culture at all. If I can make all of them laugh, which I do in my life, if I tell a story, then that's the instinct that I have that it'll work for the movie.
And what kinds of things did you have to take into consideration to reach multiple audiences? Because humor doesn't always translate, and some of it is cultural. And so what were you thinking about in terms of making sure that all 3 audiences were going to be able to find the humor? And the movie is really funny, and so it works. And so I was wondering what kinds of things you were thinking about when you were doing that.
Well, I think that, the humor isn't necessarily in the language. It's not like there's a joke, there's a setup, there's a punchline. So in many ways, the humor was in the characterization, right? Or in the absurdity of a scenario and the way the camera lingers on something. And to me, that's pretty universal. But it was tricky because I also didn't want to feel like we were laughing at people. Even though sometimes we kind of are, and I had to, like, find that, like, when is it okay? For example, Mr. Lee, the crazy boyfriend, my great aunt was on the set. She plays herself in the movie, for anyone who doesn't know.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
she did a really good job.
Thank you. Yeah, she's not an actor at all, and I cast her to be in the film. And the whole time, every time Mr. Lee was in the scene, because my grandma, a little too much info, but my grandma broke up with the boyfriend in real life. She, like, kicked him out. of the house. But the story that I wrote was based on this guy when he was still around. And so my great aunt was always like, why did you put that guy in the movie? Like, we would always make fun of him. Like, but you think he, and I was like, yeah, he's funny. She's like, he's exactly like the real guy. And so every time he would do anything, she would just look at me and we just both crack up. And so then I was like, but is it okay that we're laughing at him? And like, when is it, especially when you're doing a cultural movie in America, like, are they laughing at the culture or is it harmless laughter? I wanted to really be careful with that.
Yeah, that is a fine balance because you don't ever want people to laugh at your culture.
Exactly.
And you can't control that, but you can do as much as possible to make sure you're putting the right material in front of them. Now, you cast Awkwafina as Billi. And I think for a lot of us who are familiar with Awkwafina's comedy and her music, which is also comedy, this was an unexpected choice. And so, how did she come into the project?
Well, my producer brought her name up when we were in the middle of casting, and I did say at the time she had not done Crazy Rich Asians or Ocean's 8, and so I knew her from her rap music videos and so I said to my producer, I was like, "Wait, isn't that the girl that did my vag?" Like,
A classic.
yeah, for sure, but maybe not as the person playing you dramatically
Yes.
in the movie about your life, right? Like, and so I was very confused. Was like, in terms of like, how do you see me exactly? But she said, well, she really relates to the role and loves the script. Just meet with her. So we had coffee, and then I loved her, and she told me how she was raised by her Chinese grandmother, and then she sent in an audition tape, and it was in the audition tape that I was like, whoa, like that was not expecting that, and it's also so wonderful. Like I love getting unexpected performances out of actors or like seeing a side of an actor that no one else has seen. Like it's really thrilling to get to bring that to an audience. And so when I saw that side, I was like, wow, I didn't see it coming. No one else is going to see this coming. And it's also so heartbreaking because when the clown cries, it's much
Yes.
more heartbreaking. And that because Awkwafina has been in these very broad comedic roles, to actually see her get quiet and tap into her vulnerabilities is extremely powerful.
It is powerful. Um, I've noticed that throughout the movie, even though it is very funny, it's also heartbreaking because here's this family keeping a secret from the grandmother for her own best interests. And so, how do you balance the humor and the heartache and do so in a way that won't overwhelm the audience in either direction?
I think in some ways they influence each other. When for like the photo studio scene is a really great one because there's so much heartache in the front end in the conversation. But it's almost like music, like you're sprinkling in like these rests or these different like eighth notes with whole notes, and so or like cooking, I don't know, maybe that's a better analogy where you're doing a savory dish but you sprinkle just enough of a citrus or a sugar or whatever. Like, so it was that kind of intuition where I knew that even though this was heavy, to just always have it sprinkled lightly, the humor that it was, but it never I never, the other thing is I never directed my actors in towards the comedy, and my writing wasn't that funny. So when they read the script, they didn't know that it was a comedy, and when they performed the scenes, they didn't know they were in a comedy. So the actors, when they first saw the movie at Sundance, the first thing all of them said to me was like, "Oh my god, that was hilarious! I had no idea we were in a comedy."
Surprise!
Yeah. And I was like, well, that's what I wanted. I wanted you to play it straight because in life we don't know that we're in a comedy unless you're on a stage, right? And so,
Absolutely.
and yet you find humor in like Mr. Lee, but he doesn't think that he's in a comedy.
No.
Like he's just
No,
going
he
to the
thinks he's
bathroom
living the
doing-
dream.
Exactly.
Now, in an interview, you said, maybe I'm delusional and even thinking I'm American and that this is an American story. And so, how do you negotiate that liminal space that so many creators of color inhabit? And how does that shape your storytelling?
Well, I think this year, like the storytelling has shaped that narrative for me as much as I've shaped that story because all my life I've been negotiating. And in a way, and I've said this before too, which is that, I'm used to compromising because you're told, like, you're never going to make a film this way. This is not American. And yeah, part of you can go fight and go, yes, it is. But the other part of you, the filmmaker part, is just like, I just want to get the movie made. I don't care what you call it, right? And so I didn't necessarily, in a very loud way, shout, this has to be an American film. When American producers said, you should go to China and get a Chinese investor because this is a Chinese film, it's like, all right, I'll try that. I'm willing to try anything, but it was actually the process this year of making the film and of talking to people that has crystallized for me that this is an American film. And it's like shocking to me. I didn't think about this before, and or maybe I just didn't have the confidence to really stand by it until the movie was a success and people are like responding to it. Where I said it is a success, people are resonating with it everywhere, but also it would not be a story if she wasn't American. Like none of my narratives are narratives that make any sense, that are dramatic, if it wasn't for the fact that I was American. And so I'm starting to claim that much more, that space, because all my life it's been like, oh, like, are you going to make movies for the American market or the Chinese market? Are you going to go back to China? Maybe they'll finance your films. Or, which team do you play for almost, right? And even my parents growing up would have dinner parties with other Chinese people where they would say to all the kids, hey, if there was a war between China and America, which side would you pick?
Jesus
You're like,
Christ.
like to be drafted into, I'm like, I'm just trying to eat my McDonald's. Like, come on, man.
Let me
like,
have my nuggets, man.
Exactly. This is like too much for a 7-year-old. Do I have
now.
to? I was like, can I just get pregnant and not fight anybody? Like, that's the thing, right? But like, it was just like, but I felt like on both sides, in personal life and work, it was always about choosing a side. And through making the farewell is actually where I found my identity and said, oh, the movie works because I created it from a place of being in between. And in between is a country. Yeah. We are our own country, or we can claim put a stake in that nationality because it's real. But it's difficult, because even now, like when the film is getting ready to be released in China, a lot of people will critique it and say, well, it doesn't explore the Chinese family in depth, and this is not my Chinese family. And they're not seeing that it's because it's not told through a Chinese lens, it's told through an American lens going back to China. So there's still a lot of negotiating to be done.
Absolutely. One of the things that struck me throughout the film was that it doesn't matter where you're from, the immigrant story is very similar, as well as being the first generation to be raised in the United States, and that choice that you're forced to make, and the challenges of going back home and sort of not speaking the language that well, and everyone telling you that you're not speaking the language that well. Thank you. I know already. So you've actually faced a lot of challenges in getting this film made because people weren't sure if it was American or Chinese, and they wanted to insert, as usual, a white protagonist of some kind to save the day, and you resisted that. So what were some of the lessons that you learned from all of these challenges that you faced in getting the film made, and how did you find the integrity to stick to your vision of this film?
Well, because it's a personal story and I know what I felt experiencing it, which is much more dramatic than most movies that I watch, much more emotional, much deeper. And it was for me like, well, why can't I capture that on screen? Isn't that what art is about? To actually figure out a way to translate your experiences into whatever medium you're working with. And that was my desire to, because I felt it so deeply, it almost haunted me. I would like have dreams of like my uncle repeatedly asking me these questions and that scene, and all of these moments, and I couldn't let it go. And so it was the first time where I said, well, if the medium doesn't allow me to, if the industry of that medium also doesn't allow me to translate my real experiences for that medium, then it's the wrong medium. You know, then don't blame the story, then it's just not the place for me to tell that story. And so that's when I did the story for This American Life. And it was such a pure experience. It was so authentic to how I experienced it, and it did resonate with so many audience members that I thought, okay, well, maybe this is where I should be working as a storyteller. Because I've never had a worship of like cinema or Hollywood in that way, of it being like the worship of the industry, of the glamour, of the red carpets and all of that. I fell in love with cinema as a medium because I, started to do it, and I thought, wow, this is the integration of music and rhythm and images, and it's really powerful and transportive. But if I can't actually like use all of those tools to tell my story, then what's the point of working in that medium?
Who are some of your influences?
Uh, all over. For this film specifically was a lot of Scandinavian filmmakers and British, like Mike Lee, Ruben Ostlund, Roy Anderson. But I've also come to Asian cinema in a weird way, where I grew up going with my parents to the student union, and they would watch Chinese films like Zhang Yimou and stuff. But I was a kid that was trying to integrate into America, so I was like, reject. I'm not gonna sit here as a 10-year-old and watch Raise the Red Lantern with my parents, of course. But then, when I went to college, I took a world cinema class, and then I saw, Wong Kar-wai and Zhang Yimou, and I was like, oh wait, my parents actually saw those films, and they're actually respected in America in a different context. So then I discovered a lot of Asian cinema that way.
And what is most important to you as a screenwriter and director?
In terms of
In terms of what you prioritize to get onto the screen?
moments and tone. Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a new project now, and I realize so much of my process has shifted since this movie as well, because it used to be about structure and plot, because everyone will say, like, okay, first of all, you need a hero. That hero needs to do a lot of stuff and have a goal, and then that hero eventually reaches their goal, whether it's the goal they wanted or the goal they didn't know they wanted deep down, and whatever, right? But I found that so many of my stories all my life that I wrote were people who were stuck, and people kept saying, you can't tell stories about people who are stuck because they don't do anything. But I was like, but that's what I'm interested in. And so, in The Farewell, I faced that challenge as well, of like a character whose challenge is actually to not do anything because she's being told not to do anything, and also she's stuck in her life as well, and she's in between worlds, and she doesn't belong, and she doesn't know what to do. And so how do you create a story around that? How do you create a drive if the character is not driving the story with their actions? And so I think for me, a lot of it is like moments and set pieces, emotional, visual set pieces, tonal set pieces, not worrying about the plot, but like solidifying that, because people will remember a moment, a scene. And then you can always figure out the webbing in between to figure out how to get from point A to point B. But you want to make sure that, for me anyways, that my story is that there are these really powerful moments.
And what is the new project? Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. Is anyone on social media, or is this like private, or are we being taped?
Circle of Trust, friends.
Circle of
Circle
Trust?
of Trust.
Well, I'm working on a feature that has been announced called Children of the New World. It's sci-fi, but it's really grounded, and I keep trying to figure out how to tell it in a, like, can it be sci-fi but just two people in a room, right? Like, can it be scenes from a marriage where the whole thing is just two people, but the concept is sci-fi? I don't know yet. I haven't written it, but that's where I'm at. And because it's about a relationship, you know, and I find that so often when we go into like sci-fi ideas, it tends to go away from character and people and really lean into the sci-fi element and the visuals and the technology or whatever. And then the other project that I just started my first day on today is a series for Amazon. It's getting announced this week, but so it's pretty soon. But it's set in Hong Kong. It's about expatriates in Hong Kong, but it really deals with ambiguous loss. It's about a woman who's an expatriate in Hong Kong, and she's privileged because she has money and she's white, and her kid goes missing, and her privilege does not protect her. And so it's really an examination of privilege in this environment, all different kinds of privilege, whether it's nationality, race, money, class. So that's with Amazon and Nicole Kidman.
Oh, of course. No big deal.
I'm very excited
That
about
does
that.
sound exciting. So I have one last question before we open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. What do you like most about your work and how you do it?
What do I like most? I like just doing it. I mean, I say this now too after a whole year of not working, and everyone keeps being like, "But you are working. You're working there for the film." I'm like, "But I don't get anything from it." Like, I do love talking about it. I actually love Q&As. I love having conversations about the film. But when you're doing press, you know, and everything, you're expending a lot of energy, and I really get energy from creating and collaboration. You know, I do think that's why I became a filmmaker, because I was a writer before I became a filmmaker, and I was a classical pianist. And I found it to be so isolating just to like practice for 7 hours a day, which I never did. I barely practiced for an hour, which is why I couldn't become a concert pianist. But I love like, you know, talking to somebody about an idea, and then they bring their ideas and it becomes a whole nother, I don't know, just that energy of like back and forth. I think that's the most exciting, and then every step of it, you know, bringing a new layer to the idea.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Now we have time for a few questions from the audience. So if you have a question, oh wow. Well then, throw your hands up. Yeah, you in the denim shirt. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Horstein.
Sorry, I just saw him first.
Thank you. Congratulations. It's a really wonderful film. I had two quick questions. One is, did your grandma find out the truth as a consequence of the This American Life podcast and the movie?
Not because of the This American Life podcast, no. Because that was a while ago. That was in 2016. So and it's in English, so she did not find out because of the podcast.
Okay. Has she found out, and if so, how did she find
Yeah,
out?
she's found out. Some asshole sent her a review of the movie. It's a really long story. I haven't talked about it publicly, but a friend of hers sent her a review of the movie,
Jesus
and
Christ.
so she found out. But we're not talking about it in my family, so I should probably not talk about it in public.
And at the wedding, were the speeches at the wedding, were they as emotional as portrayed in the movie? Was it like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. Thank you.
Hi, this is a really interesting story because to me, it's oddly relatable because I actually kind of went through a very similar situation as well. But I almost feels like an alternate universe because for me, and so I'm wondering when did you realize it was like a common story? Because for me, my I found out about my grandmother's cancer earlier this year too, but I actually ended up telling her, and she actually passed away like 2 or 3 months afterwards. So I kind of feels like the alternate reality of your situation. So, but that being said, I could tell that you also know that this is common, where you like kind of keep it from the grandparents for as long as like you can, you know. So I was wondering when you realized that.
That it was common.
Yeah.
Well, I found out like once the story aired on This American Life, I got a lot of emails saying that it happened to them too. But both people, like Chinese people, but also people who were not even Asian, like just people from all over the world, like Middle East and stuff, and and the UK. And I was like, that's so strange that so many people, participate in this. In South America, but then, once the movie came out too, it became. I especially knew it was common when a lot of Chinese people were like, "What's the premise of your movie? Wait, why is that dramatic?" People think that's interesting. I mean, but we all do that, like a whole country, And so you're like, "Oh, this is why it's an American film because it's not dramatic to Chinese people."
Yeah, because I remember when I told my dad that I told my grandmother. My dad's like, "You told her?" I'm like, "What, am I not supposed to?" And he's like,
Oh no,
dude."
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Hi. You kind of touched on it earlier in the Q&A when you were talking about subtitles and translations, but I was curious as to how you came upon the two titles of the movie in English and Chinese, The Farewell and Biak Al Suta, because it's not a direct translation.
Yeah, so Biakazuta means don't tell her, which is also how my grandma found out because she was like, the title is Don't Tell Her. You guys wouldn't tell me what the movie was about or what it was called, but it's Don't Tell Her. That's why you didn't tell me. It's about me. I know. But I didn't come up with that title. The Chinese producers and my mother came up with the Chinese title. And I don't know why. They just said that worked better as a title in Chinese, like more literal.
In the middle here, yeah, just like one row up.
Hi, thank you for the film. One of the scenes that touched me the most was when there was the round table, many meals, and I love that also in the movie. But the discussion of the children that left the mainland versus and made the decision to come to America versus the ones that stayed and supported their clan, where they're from, their ancestral land. So I guess I want to get your thoughts, your personal thoughts on, do you think that because there's always tension there, and there is a commonality, I think, for immigrants of all stripes with that too.
Yeah.
Like there's always that tension, well, you left, well, you stayed, why, and questioning. So do you think that's fair to question someone's decision to leave if they think that's their destiny, that's what they're supposed to do? Or do you think that you should have an allegiance to where you're from? I guess just your thoughts on that conflict, because it is very, it's generational, but it is very common.
Yeah, I think that it's not about fairness, but it's I think in many ways it's the way that people justify their own choices. I don't think they necessarily mean to be like your choices are wrong, but in some ways we all have to justify the choice that we made was the right choice, and particularly for people who are not able to leave. For whatever reason, whether it's like a aging parent or they just couldn't get a visa, in some ways, like you have to justify that choice somehow, or you're gonna live with regret all your life. And similarly for people who did leave, like once you've made that leap, there's no way you can really go back. Either because of job or for some people, like I have friends who are young and they've left, they won't go back home, even though that's probably the better decision because they're embarrassed. They were like the one that left their small town, and everyone was like, you're gonna go and you're gonna make it, and then in a way they don't, and so they feel like if they go back it's embarrassing, and they're going with their tail tucked behind their legs or something. And so I just think it's not always malicious, to question someone else. It's just a way to justify our own choices.
Yes, up there.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I absolutely love the film. It's my favorite of the year, and I'm an aspiring writer. I like to write every day, and I was just wondering if you had any advice for beginning writers like myself.
Well, I think writing every day is a really good place to start, and yeah, just keep writing stuff. I I have a really hard time writing. It takes me a long time to write, and I'm a slow writer. And the best advice I got was that, so often we wait for inspiration to come. And then write. We think that that's how art works, is that, you sit around and you wait for inspiration to strike. But actually, it's you have to create the conditions for inspiration to come find you. And so if inspiration is out there, like if you show up at a certain time every day at that desk, then they know where to find you, right? Then that, and if you don't, it doesn't know where to find you. And I find that to be very true. Is that to create a certain consistency and to see yourself as a real writer and treat it as a job. And I've always written better when there is a deadline over me and someone's expecting something from me. So if I don't have a real deadline and someone is paying me, then I get a friend to check in and to say, like, this is the deadline. And, you need to, form those communities and those groups.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for one last question.
This was not my question, but since it's the last one, how did your grandmother feel when she found out that you'd all been not telling her the truth?
I don't know, because we haven't talked about it. So, sorry. But maybe next year. I guess we can take a different last question.
Yeah, we can take another last
I don't have an
question.
answer, I'm sorry.
Was the wedding a real marriage, and are the couple still together?
Define real. Are any weddings real? It's a ceremony, right, for the family. So, but yeah, in their case, they're still together. Yeah.
See, you can make it, kids. Thank you all so much for coming out to support this film.
Thank you.
Director Lulu Wang.